We have many intellectual elephants in the room, and I would like to open the floor for questions. And I already see some. Let's keep the questions very short, that we can go back to the panel, please.
Yeah, try to collect them. There's one gentleman in the back. Maybe if you could pass over the microphone here, if you just make a sign.
And please briefly introduce yourself.
Tobias Sauer, thank you very much. Tobias Sauer, writing for Café Babel. A question for Professor Monti. Italy is too big to fail, yet too big to bail. What should be done in Italy now, given the today's rise in interest rate? So what should be done now? And maybe a second little delicate question, if the Quirinale would call today, è pronto? Thank you.
You want to answer right away? There's no call, or is there?
That I will not disclose. What needs to be? Shall I? What needs to be done now? Yes, it's not the easiest circumstance in which to say this. But of course it is the right place. Obviously some, well, it's not for me to touch on the subject of the relationship between political parties, personalities and credibility and the markets. In terms of what needs to be done, I think there has never been such an abundance of converging recipes and recommendations and guidelines. By the way, as to the letter of the ECB to the Italian authorities, of course it is institutionally improper, but I don't think it really is a vulnus to democracy, because the Bank of Italy, many independent economists, the European Commission, the IMF, the OECD, over the months and years that have elapsed, had exactly said the same thing. Of course, is the letter bears the signature of the leaders of an institution which, unlike economists or think tanks, has the power to purchase or not purchase government security of a certain country, that carries for sure more weight. But so this is to say that Italy has two positive points here. There is not much intellectual divergence about what needs to be done. And secondly, this is rather unique. What Italy is asked urgently to do is, of course, a maintenance and a consolidation and the structuralization of the improvements in public finance. But it is also asked to do what any country would love to be asked to do, that is more growth. Of course, not more growth through more deficit, but more growth through the removal of structural impediments to growth. But it has been realized, I think, for the first time for any country by the rating agencies and all the other institutions, that even public finance is at risk in spite of good progress in the last few years, because it would not be sustainable unless the growth rate of the economy improves. But there we come to the critical point, because growth requires structural reforms of the sort of taking away privileges and rents from practically each category in the society. And can a sharply divided political spectrum where everybody is naturally protecting their constituencies achieve this, or can this be more easily or less painfully achieved by eine italienische große Koalition?
All right. Any more questions or comments who would like to add to this rather optimistic view? Please, I can.
I'm not sure if it is. I'm Mary Caldor from LSE. Mary Caldor from LSE. I'm not sure if it is an optimistic view. I have my doubts. What seems to me not to have come across is the sense that the euro crisis is a symptom of a much deeper crisis, that it's a structural crisis in our economies, in the type of growth that we've followed up till now. And I really wonder whether removing structural impediments is going to be enough. I can't believe without a major investment in green technologies, for example, or in youth training and employment, we can really get back to a new path of growth. And I don't see how that can be done unless there really is a much stronger mechanism at a European level, a fiscal mechanism of some kind, and I don't see how that can be done without the kind of democratization that Sophie was talking about. So that's my question to you.
Right,
Very good. Shall we collect perhaps two more?
Up to you. If you prefer that, we can do that. So there's one more question here, and there's one more there. Maybe somebody can bring a microphone over there.
Chiara Saraceno from Italy and Berlin. I am not as optimistic as you are, Professor Monti.
Have I been optimistic?
No, on your last note, concerning the convergence in what should be done, maybe among intellectuals, not among social partners. I mean, I wish there would be a grosse coalition in Italy, but I wonder whether they will really agree on specific items, pensions, and so on and so forth. So I doubt it. I wish there will be, but you yourself have been critical of the Trichet and Draghi letter as being too mercatistic, if I remember. No? No? I think so. Anyway, I have a question also for Professor Scharpf. You said, and I agree, that one size fits all in monetary policy is not working and probably is going to be disruptive. But how can you have a policy, a more, let's say, heterogeneous or more diversified policy within the Eurozone? I mean, practically, how would it work out?
Okay, we take on board another question over here. Somebody, there we are.
And this is not a press conference of a future Italian policy.
Please.
I'm Lanka from Oxford. My question
you have to have the microphone a bit closer.
Yeah, my question is, would we be in the trouble with euro if there wouldn't be financial crisis on Wall Street and banking crisis on Wall Street 2008? Because this depends this shapes the answer to the questions whether we are having instruments in our hands in Europe on our own. And do you think that monetary policies or descriptions will address structural problems of political culture and political networks in countries like Greece or Italy?
Thank you very much. There's one more here, Quentin Peel, and then I think you should start answering.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask you, what is the minimum fiscal union that we need to make it work? And, well, just that, I think. What is the absolute minimum that we need to make it work?
It's a nice and short question at the end. I think we now should let you answer.
Let's go back. Why don't we go this way, and all of you can briefly react, because there were a few questions addressed to all of you.
Well, the answer to that question, I think, is some form of integrated European government bond market, an equivalent in liquidity and scale to the US Treasury. That doesn't mean to say that it's a blank check to deficit countries. It can be set in a framework. It can be limited to amounts that will encourage further reductions of deficits and the rest. But the key, we are at present not having in global terms the key advantage that the US dollar has of a deep and liquid single treasury market. And since that would also help solve the credibility problems of the system as it presently stands, that is an advantage which it's very unfortunate that we don't have. I quite understand why there is German reluctance on this, wanting to see extract a very substantial price in discipline, which I entirely applaud, in encouraging the process of change which the euro is pushing. And this crisis is more serious than anybody could have expected. I think we would have been here even if we hadn't had Lehman Brothers, but it certainly would be, it's been made vastly more difficult by the combination of the inadequacies, the incompleteness of the euro model with regard to deficit controls and the fact that the rules were breached, by having at the same time an absolutely gigantic systemic financial crisis. But that's the crucial thing, it seems to me, is the single treasury market of some kind.
Okay, Sylvie.
I could not agree more than what you've said. Just a piece of information. I was one of the rapporteurs of the economic governance package, so-called six-pack. I've put the Eurobonds in the package because I really believe that we have to combine, on one hand, discipline, and part of the German public is asking for very strong discipline before doing the Eurobonds. But I agree with you, we are completely, I mean, if we conceive the economic governance of the euro without any global dimension, we are losing one of the most important elements. So I fully agree with what you've said. On the crisis, yes, I believe we would have had the crisis, and we have to take the responsibility for what we have not done. For example, to have, in a single market of financial services, to have a financial regulation and supervision. If you look at the de la Rosière report, this is something that should have been done before. The Barroso I Commission with Charlie McCreevy and Barroso himself were, I'm sorry, ideologically biased, and they refused any kind of regulation and supervision. And if you read the Turner report that was written in the UK, the idea that you cannot have a single market for financial services and bank insurance, etc., without having some regulations is something obvious. If I may, just one point, if I may, on what Mario said on the euro, non-euro, because this is an answer to your question too. My feeling is that, and once again, I'm getting schizophrenic, because when I'm in France, I'm always pleading for the countries that are not in the Eurozone, in a country that is completely focusing now on how can we destroy the last enlargement. It's something very strong in the public debate in France. The last enlargement was a mistake. We have to go back to something. And I try to understand why we have this feeling. And Mario, what you have presented as a contradiction or as a pity that we cannot combine is perceived by many people in France with many mistakes on what the Germans think, or even more what the Dutch people or some others within the Eurozone, and I like to say it in German, is that there would be a Wir-Gefühl inside and not with the others. And that some difference... Which means the feeling to build a we. The feeling to be together. It's something you cannot translate, and that's the reason why I like German. It's a Wir-Gefühl, and everybody has to learn what a Wir-Gefühl is. No, but sometimes, no.
You're right. The sense of belonging together, right?
No, the sense of
togetherness.
Togetherness. The ownership of something, and I'm quite sure that we really have to work on this. I do not have the answer, but on one hand, we have always tried to build something by being open and by trying to find compromises between different visions of economy, of trade. Do we need free trade or not? Do we need open competition or not? Do we need tax competition? Do we need wages competition, or do we need something more regulated? I don't want here to defend the French vision. I'm just trying to explain that at least in some countries and for some citizens, the idea that we try to unite something where there are so strong divergences is something creating an anxiety. That's the only thing I wanted to say. I don't know where I'm sure, and the Franco-German cooperation is, I would say, is structurally, permanently an engine to overcome divergences. But nevertheless, that kind of divergences we are used to. And it's very funny to look or to listen to Mr. Sarkozy, who 3 years ago was criticizing Germany too much. Now he's, be careful, he might come here and decide to become German. But it's in all the speeches, it might be just an image of who is a foreigner, who is not. But of course, the main issue in front of us is, are we having divergences we can overcome with good compromises? Or do we pay the price for years of, how do you say, oxymorons, where we have tried to combine different visions, but without actually finding a compromise? And this is a pity, because I really believe that there are free riders phenomenon. What you have described, I'm elected in the western part of France, my voters tell me we cannot going on with the British vegetables coming now with such a devaluation in the prices or whatever. So I have no answer. I just want to say that in the perception and the reality, the Wahrnehmung and the reality are quite different on what is making us living together.
Mario.
On minimum fiscal union, I would agree with what John and Sylvie said. I would only add, this was slightly hinted at by Sylvie Goulart, the tax coordination element. I believe that if we want to keep a consensus going or to rebuild a consensus on economic integration in Europe, we have to reconcile citizens and workers and trade unions' perceptions with the single market, which has been seen as enemy of the social. And in one respect, it is actually enemy, and that is that if there is not some tax coordination, not necessarily full tax harmonization, year after year, the mobility of capital leads to reduced rate of taxation on capital income, and by implication increased rates of taxation on labor income, which is exactly the opposite of what a policy for jobs requires. Hence, some tax coordination that would put this under control is important. It appeared for the first time in the Euro Plus Pact. The question on what the implications of monetary policy on political behavior in Germany and Italy, I must say I didn't completely get. Yeah, well, there are others here who know Greek problems much better than I do, but if we take the various recommendations / prescriptions by the Troika, the IMF, the Commission and the ECB to Greece, we see, like for Italy for that matter, we see certainly a number of measures of public finance, but a long and very detailed list of measures about reinforcing the national competition authority, more transparent public procurement, the liberalization in the closed professions, and so on and so forth. All things that, of course, by introducing more competition will, in due course, introduce more merit and less role for nepotism, clientelism, corruption, whatever.
Very good. Fritz?
on this last point of fiscal property. I just want to say between 2000 and 2008, that is before the American financial market crisis began, Spain and Portugal have dramatically reduced total public debt to levels far below the 60% limit of the Stability Pact, between 30% and 40% of GDP, much, much lower than Germany. Germany was always above the 60% limit. And now, even now, the total public debt in Germany is higher than the total public debt in Spain. So fiscal property as such is not the explanation of the current crisis. It is a problem in Greece, it's a problem in Italy and in other countries, but it doesn't have a causal role in explaining the current crisis. Then on the other points that were more directly directed at me, what is the minimum fiscal union? I would go much further than you, and probably even further than you would. The EU budget ought to be higher, and not only because of defense and defense procurement. There could very well be a Europe-wide unemployment insurance, for instance, and there ought to be a common European tax on capital incomes and corporate profits that would eliminate lots of problems that the member states have. So I am a Eurosceptic, meaning the euro. I'm not a European skeptic. I say the euro is a case of economic over-integration that should never have been attempted in the way it was. But there are other areas where European integration ought to go much further than it does at the moment. And our inability to distinguish between areas where integration is beneficial for all member states and a form of integration which is destructive of member states, that distinction, I think, is important for us to make. As far as monetary policy and how would it be possible to have differentiated monetary policy, I have asked that oftentimes to people involved with the ECB and others, and I didn't get a good answer. There have been economists who say it is possible in theory for a central bank, for a European central bank, to have differentiated money supply policies for different member states, or to have differentiated interest rate policies for member states. But none of the people associated with the European Central Bank were interested at all, because they refused to recognize the causal influence of the one-size-fits-all monetary policy on the fate of the economies that are in the Union. If one had to do it over, I think a reformed European monetary system, as we had it up to 1999, would have been much better than the EMU. Reform meaning the role of the Bundesbank that was single-mindedly looking only at the German economy and completely disregarding the external effects of its policies on everybody else who was in the EM. That role had to be eliminated. There needed to be a central institution taking that role. But beyond that, the coordination that was achieved in the EMS would have been entirely sufficient for all economic purposes. It was the resentment of the Bundesbank that brought the French and everybody else to ask for monetary union, and it was German unification which forced the German government to give in.
I know there are temptations to react.
But
So let's give each of you just one last word to react. I know John was first, Sylvie, and you get the last word.
Well, I mean, I just think those last remarks are nonsense. Because, I mean, the fact is that the ERM, you had a target which could be hit. In the case of Sterling and George Soros hit it. The ERM was exploded by the revolution in financial markets that allowed vastly increased liquidity. And if as any form of currency peg system in today's financial markets is just unsustainable. That's why the logic is you can either have to go back to free floating exchange rates or you had to have a full-blown monetary union. And to preserve the single market, we had a full-blown monetary union. Now we've got the fact that you've got some different targets in the bond markets, and the logic then to end that problem is to have only one target in the bond markets. But I quite appreciate that is an obviously much more complicated exercise and has tremendous political implications. But that is the end of the route. And ultimately, this whole story is that we are going to move towards limited use of Eurobonds, it seems to me. And the question is, what does Germany want in return for that? And I think it is very, I think the present government has been absolutely right not to give that too soon, because the crucial thing about the euro is to keep the disciplines that the monetary union is forcing, keep that pressure on, because this is fundamentally positive for the overall competitive capacity of the European economy. There's no question about that.
Julie.
I have nothing to add when British Conservatives plead in this way for the euro. Thanks.
Mario, your last words. Still no phone call?
No, it was
Giorgio.
a joke which I postponed. I'm not sure it will succeed, but I'm compelled. You spoke of the elephant in the room. I'm not sure it is the elephant actually, but in Le Petit Prince, in the Little Prince, the snake, the animal within the snake.
It's a lamb. It's a mouton.
Ah, sorry. No, because if it had been an elephant, as I... then, of course, the ERM was called the snake in the tunnel, and I'm sorry, but...
we will ask Sylvie to change this in Saint-Exupéry. Okay, let's stop here. I wish everyone a great evening and a nice trip home, and do get on the right planes. Thank you very much.
I do have to say thank you.